And by you, the people. Live nationwide and streaming live at lesliemarshallshow.com. Call in with your thoughts at 888-6-LESLIE.
Hey there, I'm Leslie Marshall. Welcome or welcome back. Only True Democracy and Talk. Thank you for listening and for watching wherever you get this program. Some of you are watching on Twitter or LinkedIn or Facebook or YouTube Live. Some of you are listening live on radio or stream. And some of you will be listening to this later when we're not live via podcast. Whichever way you get the show. We appreciate you tuning in. Well, today, instead of from the headlines to start it off, we have two guests joining us, one for the first half, one for the second. I count both of them friends. I'm really lucky to have such prestigious friends and certainly friends of the program as well. He hasn't been on in a long time. I've missed him, and I'll tell him about something in a sec. But first up, we have New York Times bestselling author Julian Zelizer. Julian's been among the pioneers in the revival of American political history. He is the Malcolm Stevenson Forbes Class of 1941 Professor of History and Public Affairs at Princeton University and a CNN Political... Wait a minute. Huh? Class of 1941? He is the Malcolm Stevenson Forbes recipient. He is a professor of history and public affairs at Princeton University. I don't think he's old enough to be class of 1941. And he's a CNN political analyst, a regular guest on NPR's Here and Now, which I just heard him the other day. He is an award-winning author and editor of 25 books. Talk about an overachiever, huh? Including his latest Myth America, Historians Take on the Biggest Lies and Legends About Our Past. He co-edited it with Kevin Cruz. His website is julianzelizer.com, julianzelizer.com. And on Twitter, follow him at the same name and spelling, at Julian Zelizer. More than a pleasure to have back on the program, Julian Zelizer, our friend who's doing more and more and more, keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And I'm so proud of you. And, I've seen you on CNN, and I've been following everything you're doing on Facebook and with the kids in Princeton and all that. I know that you had a move recently. But Julian, I was listening to NPR, as I often do, and I heard you on Here and Now. And I heard some questions about what we are going to talk about, and that is our current president, President Joe Biden, his announcement that he's going to run again, and all things surrounding that, and some other stuff we'll get in this half hour as well. So welcome and welcome back. I've missed you so much.
It's great to be back with you. I always love being on the show.
And we love having you. I said to Mark, I was just as a Julian NPR the other day. Why isn't he doing our show? I'm like, is he too big for us now? 25 bucks, but anyway, and congrats. I'm so, my kids are in high school, and my daughter could probably go to Princeton, not my son. I shouldn't say that on the air, but I'm proud of your kids when I see the things you post. So President Biden finally announced that, he's running. And of course we get a plethora of things coming out. First off, because, you are a professor of history, your books are historical and political, and you know so much, with politics and history. It is historical that he's going to be the oldest running president. How much do you think that will possibly or potentially weigh in on voters' minds? Because especially if Donald Trump ends up being the GOP nominee, for some people, I saw a bumper sticker on the way here that said from 2020, any adult. And some people, and I have Republican friends who voted for Trump the first time around, and they kind of they don't want to go back to that. I don't want to go back to that circus. So let's first talk about his age, and then we'll get to some other things.
Look, I think what we're seeing in polls is that it is something voters are thinking about. It's not going to be insignificant. It won't be unnoticed. It is historic to have someone of this age. So it's a bit of a test in terms of where the electorate is, but it doesn't mean it will determine the election. Just because we have an older candidate, we'll have two older candidates most likely. Voters might, conclude that will not inhibit him from being very effective in the next 4 years. B, they might be comfortable with the team around him, which is what his opening ad is focused on in part. as a sense of comfort that he will be helped as the next few years go by. And most important, the alternative might be much less attractive. The risks of having someone older might be not as worrying as the risks of having the turbulence of the Trump presidency return.
Yeah, and if it ends up being DeSantis, who's younger, it may not be a race between young and old, but between experience and lack of experience, especially on a national stage, a national level. When we talk about, I want to talk about those around him in a minute, but let's talk about some polls. I mean, the polls are pretty bad for Joe Biden, but he's fared better than most presidents with midterm election and holding on to seats and not losing seats. Are we in a very different place with regard to the polls, especially since the 2016 election when they weren't accurate?
Yeah, we are. I mean, well, it's the question of accuracy. It's the question of how polls can change. We're a long way from the election, but it's also something his former chief of staff, Ron Klain, talked about. We're in an era where presidents just aren't going to have very strong approval ratings. It's difficult given how polarized the electorate is. And so you're not looking for someone with 60, 70% approval ratings. You're just seeing if they can squeak up high enough, close to 50% if possible, but maybe even under and still win. So I think he's where a lot of presidents have been, including the former president, where other presidents will be in futures. And you have to just win with narrow support and not necessarily being loved by the whole electorate, but accepted and still desired as the best option.
Even though the whole electorate would be our 50 states, and people will say this is a 50-state race, in reality, nowadays it isn't. It comes down to 4 or 5 states at the end of the day, right? I mean, that, and that's where we're going to see most of the money and most of the campaigning on both sides of the aisle.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't had a landslide election really since 1984 when Ronald Reagan defeated Walter Mondale. Most elections now, presidential elections, are determined by a handful of states. Much of the rest of the map stays the same election after election. So the real key won't be national approval ratings. What we're really going to follow is what are his poll numbers as this unfolds in these key states, and can he get them high enough to turn out Democratic votes, maybe swing some moderate voters. And the Electoral College right now looks pretty good for the Democrats, especially what's happened in Georgia. The Republicans are going to have a longer haul to try to, turn enough votes.
Let's talk about the people around him. One big name around him, Ron Klain, was talking about her with regard to her gender and her race, and that's the Vice President Kamala Harris. Very low, lower than the president approval ratings. Some people talk about, look, he's going to be the oldest guy. What if he doesn't make it through 4 years? She'll become president. She's got low numbers. I know in back rooms there are Democrats, on my side of the aisle that are worried about this. Certainly Republicans want to emphasize this. But, it reminds me of Prince Harry wrote a book called Spare. And the reason I say that is I think often vice presidents are looked at as the spare, right? And also, there are many people out there who don't even know who the vice president is, or certainly, historically, or what a vice president does, except wait around in case the president gets sick, or dies. Terrible to say, but, in reality, how much historically has a vice president's name, the second name on the ticket, mattered? And how much will this matter now because it is a woman, because it is a woman of color, and because she's got low approval ratings and Joe Biden's the oldest guy running?
Yeah, I mean, it's rarely an issue. Most people never know what the vice president is doing. It's fascinating to see all the attention people seem to have on her. I think a lot of things are going on. Part of it is the age question, but part of it, I think, is a little bit more probably about who she is. So I do think whether it's fair or not, whether this is more than usual, there will be, energy spent by the Biden campaign, even though in the end it's going to be about Biden, not about Vice President Harris, to convince the public that at a minimum, she's very smart, intelligent, and capable of handling the presidency should it come to that. I don't think she needs to be another, soaring rhetorical politician like a Barack Obama. But I think they just have to meet the case that stability will be achieved if necessary.
In less than 60 seconds, This is a president who's going to be campaigning while president. This has certainly happened before. Is it me, or are people making a big deal out of this?
No, this happens all the time. The Rose Garden strategy is one way in which this works. You campaign by governing and show the country you can be president, but others, while they're governing, also go out on the campaign trail. This is literally what we see again and again. So there's nothing unusual about it, and there's nothing that can't be achieved doing both at the same time.
We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back, and we're going to talk about one of those potential GOP nominees, Ron DeSantis, and a guy called Mickey Mouse. We'll be back in a few minutes. I'm Leslie Marshall. Julian Zelizer is our guest, New York Times bestseller. He's written not 1, not 10, not 20, but 25 books. His latest is Myth America, Historians Take on the Biggest Lies and Legends About Our Past, co-edited with Kevin Cruz. His website, julianzelizer.com, and follow him on Twitter at the same, @JulianZelizer. I'm Leslie Marshall, back with him, back with you, right after this.
If you came across someone struggling with hunger, how would you recognize them? By their clothes, their age, the way they speak? Would you notice an 8-year-old girl who's not excited for summer break
because she may not be having lunch again until September?
Or a single father of 2 who works 3
part-time jobs and still can't put enough food on the table?
Or maybe a mother who cleans offices at night,
hoping to find meeting leftovers to take home to her hungry family?
or a war veteran who's having a hard time
landing a job and getting back on his feet.
I am the 1 in 8 Americans who struggle with hunger. People you pass by every day but never knew were hungry. I am hunger in America.
Hunger can be hard to recognize. Learn why at IamHungerInAmerica.org.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1971. That was the day the Occupational Safety and Health Act went into effect. At the time, it was estimated that 14,000 workers died annually on the job, 2.2 million workers were permanently or temporarily disabled, and 500,000 developed occupational diseases each year. It was estimated that at least 25 million serious injuries and deaths went unreported each year. Many of the standards, regulations, and enforcements OSHA now has have come as a result of intense, continuous pressure waged by the labor movement. The Oil, Chemical, and Atomic Workers Union was the first to test out the new bill when they filed a complaint against the Allied Chemical Company in Moundsville, West Virginia in May of 1971. Among the many hazards at the facility, pools of mercury on the shop floor were common occurrences. OSHA issued its first citation against Allied Chemical under the General Duty Clause. The first OSHA standard issued came a year later for asbestos. Today, the AFL-CIO notes that for the year 2015, 4,836 workers were killed on the job. There is only one OSHA inspector for every 76,000 workers, and on average, it would take OSHA 145 years to inspect every workplace in the country. But new rules protecting workers from silica dust and beryllium have been established, as have strong reporting and record-keeping standards. There are stricter coal dust standards and anti-retaliation protections for workplace whistleblowers. The Trump administration is currently looking to overturn all of it. You can take action this Workers' Memorial Day to protect working conditions on the job by finding an event in your area by going to aflcio.org.
Whoa, a new digital music player. Thanks, Mom.
Oh, I'm glad you like it, because I can't wait to toss the big stereo. And now that we got your dad that big HD TV he wanted, we can throw out our old TV too.
Hold up. You can't just throw out electronics.
Really?
They need to be recycled or donated.
And how would we do that?
It's so easy, Mom. Today, recycling electronics is just as easy as buying them. GreenerGadgets.org has all the info. We just enter our zip code to find a certified recycling center nearby. There are thousands of them, and new ones are being added all the time. Some of our local stores are even certified recycling locations.
I like that.
Did you know that some of the stuff in our old electronics could be used to make new products and conserve natural resources?
Well, okay then. Let's gather them up. What was that website again?
GreenerGadgets.org. We just enter our zip code and go.
Thank you. We are back. We being me, Leslie Marshall, and our guest, New York Times bestselling author Julian Zelizer. His latest book is called Myth America, Historians Take on the Biggest Lies and Legends About Our Past. He is not only a professor of history and public affairs at Princeton University, he's also a CNN political analyst, a regular guest on NPR's Here and Now, and author of not just this latest book, but 24 prior to this. On his website, julianzelizer.com, you can find out more and buy his book, JulianZelizer.com. And on Twitter, follow him at the same name and spelling, at Julian Zelizer. Julian, thank you for holding. Welcome back. Let's talk about Ron DeSantis and DeSantis's war on Disney. You know, yesterday I was on Bret Baier's special report on Fox News Channel, and I was on a panel, and one of my colleagues was talking about him, and I was talking about how he's dropping in the polls and he's less, favorable. And in Florida, he was saying, though, that, that's not the case. But this war on Disney and this fight might have been a big mistake. Do you think it's a big mistake because nationally his numbers have gone down and Donald Trump has taken up those numbers that Ron DeSantis has lost thus far?
Yeah, I mean, I think the governor is slowly eroding the very theme that he wanted to campaign on originally, which made him attractive to Republicans, that he was the most electable, the leader with the greatest kind of executive vision, who was able to build a coalition in Florida that was broader than the narrow Republican coalition we see nationally. But with Disney, he's taking a deep dive again into the culture wars. He's boxing himself into a very rightward position on issues such as sexuality and reproductive rights, which is part of what the whole Disney battle is about. I don't think that's going to serve him well. And also, he's taking on a major corporation in his state, and that can go very poorly. And a lot of Republicans who are sympathetic to business are not going to be comfortable with this kind of aggressive, hands-on government decision making from someone.
Chris Christie said, who's on CNN with you as well. Chris Christie said that this is basically not conservative because you're attacking not just a private company, but in a sense capitalism.
Yeah, and it's a source of revenue in his state. So if this goes south, Nikki Haley's already invited Disney to come to South Carolina. If this goes poorly, it will hurt him. And if there's any economic effect, that will not be a good sign of what he would do as president.
No, I agree. And I think right now it's really hurt him in addition because, in the headlines, you see him, out of Florida when there's a massive flood. You see him in Israel and his numbers are going down. And I know he's getting money and he's getting support. And South Florida has a very large Jewish community. That's not the majority of voters in the state. And I know a lot of people are saying in Florida, Governor, you need to be here. Yeah. You need to be home. You need to govern here in Florida, one. And two, Disney is not one of those companies, I don't care. There are conservatives out there who may be totally in line when it comes to book banning and don't say gay and all that stuff with Ron DeSantis, but they're still going to take their kids to say Mickey Mouse. I mean, Disney is something that is loved, by people regardless of their ideology for their kids and the kid, the big kid in them or the little kid within that big kid. And like you pointed out, crucial source of revenue, for his state. This is just a lose-lose, and he has the opportunity to back off. Also, for Republicans that felt Donald Trump was too extreme, I think there were Republicans that are concerned about, I know it's not don't say gay legislation, but it has been dubbed such, the books, politics attacking a private company. If that guy becomes president, we're going to have this on a federal level, on a national level. That is a concern among voters, even conservatives.
Yeah, and let's remember, he's not the front runner. Donald Trump is. So he's not kind of doing all this from a position of power right now, and his polls are slipping. So he can't afford to make himself a much narrower candidate as he is doing right now, and he'll lose. I mean, I think that's what he's doing to himself. It's remarkable to watch someone take on this iconic company that is so loved in his own state and do it when he can't really afford to take these kinds of hits politically. But he's deep into this right now. It's one of those moments you see in politics I called it a quagmire. It's like he can't get himself out of it. And people must think around him this is a good idea, but we'll see.
So far, it's not showing it's a good idea, and it's taking up all the oxygen in the room, right? That and him not being out of state, and then, these pieces of legislation that I think he thought were a win. Something else that's taking up a lot of oxygen is Donald Trump, as he normally does, and his attacks on Ron DeSantis. There are different schools of thought. Ron DeSantis should just keep on, the straight and narrow. But more and more people are saying Ron DeSantis needs to fight back. When you look historically at opponents and attacks, what would you advise Ron DeSantis to do regarding that?
Well, he should if he can. I don't know if he can. I mean, you lose over time if someone as kind of significant as the former president is systematically ripping you apart and basically defining your character to the public, which Trump is brilliant at doing. And then on top of it, DeSantis is playing into those characterizations. And if he doesn't say anything, this will sink in. And by the time he announces that he is going to run, if he does that, it's too late to undo that kind of damage, especially if you're not a nationally known figure, which he still isn't. And so I think there's a high cost. The question is, can he really do that? I don't know if he can take on Donald Trump and that kind of back and forth. And many very big Republicans learned in 2015 and 16, it's not so easy.
It's interesting because, as not just talk shows, but a Democratic strategist, I, as a Democrat, was definitely more concerned about Ron DeSantis running against Joe Biden because I thought he's younger. I thought, he's got that big state that comes down to one of those 4 or 5 for some reason. I don't know why. Florida's been red for a while now, right? And in addition to that, he definitely is an alternative. People don't look at him as a Trump. Even though he's not, they look at him as more of a moderate or old school Reagan Republican, even though he's not. And there are many Republicans that want to take their party back and bring their party back to that. But now you talked about the Electoral College favoring Democrats. Donald Trump being the GOP nominee would also favor Democrats because there's a lot of people within the Republican Party that I don't think will hold their nose again and vote for him twice.
Yeah, and this is a tested competition, meaning Biden defeated him already. So there's something to base this on. There's some kind of way to predict. I think he can still be a strong candidate. I mean, I think we shouldn't underestimate what he can do. And, how things might look now that Biden is someone 4 years into a presidency with a record as opposed to who he was in 2020. But yes, I think a lot of Democrats are more excited to face Trump, and that might be a mistake, but they do feel that way than they are DeSantis. And now DeSantis is looking like Rick Perry, Jeb Bush, all the governors who are high flyers and just collapsed when they national spotlight.
Yes or no? Will Donald Trump, if he gets the nomination, be the first president to be president, lose after one term and come back and run again and be the nominee?
Yeah, he could. I think he is going to get the nomination. I still am persuaded he is far ahead of the rest of the bunch.
I agree with you there. Julian, love having you. Thank you for being with us. Julian Zelizer, New York Times bestseller, also professor of history and public affairs at Princeton University, CNN political analyst, regular guest on NPR's Here and Now. He's an award-winning author, 25 books, and his latest is Myth America, Historians' Take on the Biggest Lies and Legends About Our Past. We're going to post everything like his website, his Twitter handle, and more coming up.
Thanks.
The Alzheimer's Association and the Ad Council present the story of Tom and Levi.
Tom is the smartest man I know. He's been a professor at 2 major universities, been a teacher for over 40 years. One day, he told me that he was having problems in his classes. I think one of the students had asked the question and he didn't remember the answer. And I also noticed that he was letting his class out earlier than they were supposed to let out. And he was telling them that he was doing it as a favor to them, but I think in reality, he just wanted to get out of there. I was really starting to worry because I saw something was wrong.
Levi and I talked about how it would change our lives, but he was there beside me, and my love for him was just immense.
When something feels different, it could be Alzheimer's. Now is the time to talk. Visit alz.org/ourstories to learn more. A message from the Alzheimer's Association and the Ad Council.
What grows in the forest? Trees? Sure.
Know what else grows in the forest? Our imagination, our sense of wonder, and our family bonds grow too. Because when we disconnect from this and connect with this, we reconnect with each other and build family memories we will carry with us forever. The forest is closer than you think. Find a forest near you and start exploring at discovertheforest.org. It's easy. Just put in your zip code to find family-friendly outdoor destinations near you. You'll also find guides to free activities, games, and amazing forest facts. Give the magic of the outdoors to your kids and reconnect with your family. Find a forest near you at discovertheforest.org. That's discovertheforest.org. Brought to you by the United States Forest Service and the Ad Council.
Given the rabid right-wingism of most Republican office holders in my state of Texas, you might assume that the climate here is only fit for rattlesnakes, scorpions, and venomous critters of pious political extremism. Yet, the true Texas political character, historically and currently, is vehemently anti-corporate and deeply rooted in the uniting ethic of the common good. For an historic example, look to the state's first constitution. It outlawed banks and required a two-thirds vote of the legislature to form a corporation. And today, grassroots Texans in the rural town of Llano have just demonstrated the power of progressive community values that are common in this supposedly conservative state. The issue was book banning. A batch of political extremists had decided to purge the public library of 17 books. Porno, they shrieked, yet none are pornographic. They're simply about ideas and realities that Republican culture war zealots don't like. Namely, books documenting the history of institutional racism in America and the normality of America's LGBTQ community. Common sense Llano locals rebelled, suing the county government for autocratically trying to control the people's freedom to read and learn. And a federal judge has now ruled that the book banning was flagrantly unconstitutional, ordering the targeted titles back on the shelves. Then, in a collective spasm of knee-jerk ignorance and arrogance, the county's book-banning officials announced that, by gollies, they would just defund and shut down the entire library system. Yeah, that'll teach people to respect authority. Again, though, locals rebelled, turning out in force to protest the officials' political chicanery, forcing them to reverse their closure scheme. This is Jim Hightower saying,
We are back. I'm Leslie Marshall. Welcome to the second half of this hour and our second guest in this hour. And thank you for joining us, listening and watching wherever you get the program. We appreciate you being with us. And I appreciate this one being with us. Now, this woman is actually married to another orthopedic surgeon who is a friend of mine and my husband's, and he and I went to like rival high schools at different times. And I just, I came to really like her and adore her personally. And she wrote a book, and she had the book out, and I checked it out. And, you know, I interview a lot of authors, and it was really good. It really, really was. I'm not just saying that. And I love her personally. I like her work professionally. So when she wrote a second book, I said, Mark, we have got to get her on or get her back on, right? Dina Gachman is our guest. She is a Pulitzer Center Grantee. She's a frequent contributor to the New York Times, Vox, Texas Monthly, and more. She's a New York Times bestselling ghostwriter. And if I ever write a book, I got to hire her. And the author, I know, I keep talking to you, right? I'm going to do it, right? Keep pushing it down the road. And the author of Brokenomics, 50 Ways to Live the Dream on a Dime. Like I said, it was a great book. If you don't have it, check it out. And it's very, very helpful. As well as her latest book, just out this month, different than her first book topic-wise. And we're going to discuss that book today. The title is So Sorry for Your Loss, How I Learned to Live with Grief and Other Grave Concerns. Now, Dina and I are friends. We both have lost a parent, and have grappled with grief. And it's not something a lot of people talk about, but the way she writes about it in this book, to me, it is so relatable. It is so personal, it is so relatable. And it's something we all go through, whether it's a mother or a father, whether it's, old age, dementia, a cancer, a car accident. Losing someone you love is so difficult, especially because, we all that cliche grief comes in waves, which is so true. Dina lives near Austin, Texas with her husband and her son. He's so adorable. And her website is dinagachmanwrites.com. That's DinaGachmanWrites.com. On Twitter, please follow her there at Dina Gachman, DinaGachman. Without further ado, the author of So Sorry for Your Loss, How I Learned to Live with Grief and Other Grave Concerns. Dina, welcome, or I should say welcome back. I think we had you on the show with the first book too. Mm-hmm. Dina, question. You go from, hey, here's 50 ways to live the dream on a dime to I'm going to talk about, things that are very emotional, very personal, and talking about living with grief and other grave concerns, as you talk about in your book, So Sorry for Your Loss. What made you make this jump? Was it because, was it because of the passing of a parent and someone that, you loved so dearly? Because, you and I don't think you were in Austin yet at that time.
No. Yeah. Well, first, thanks for having me on. And, my first book was a while ago and it was pretty much straight humor, kind of humor about money. So it was very different. And I remember with that book thinking like, I just want to entertain people. I just want to make them laugh. And I never imagined I would write a book about grief, but my mom died in 2018 from colon cancer. And then about 2 years later, my sister Jackie from alcoholism. And so I had, grief obviously changed my life, and I was just curious about it myself. It was something I was living with every day. And I think coming through the pandemic also, it's something that definitely touched all of us, unless you were living under a rock. So it's a very different kind of book. It still has some humor in it. But with this book, it's obviously not straight humor because it's about grief, but I just felt like, with the loss of my mom, but then my sister so soon. And also I didn't find a lot about losing a sibling to alcoholism out there. So I really wanted to write about that experience because I think there's so many of us, whether it's a sibling or a spouse or, a parent, there's just not a ton out there. And so that was important to me to kind of look at that. So it wasn't something that I ever, woke up and thought I'm going to write a grief book at the beginning of my career. It just happened because from life experience.
So many questions. One, did you find it easier to write this book than the other because you are so personally connected to the subject?
The other one was easier because I was just having a rip-roaring time. I was just writing humorous essays and laughing, and it was fun. This one was much more difficult because it's personal, but I also weave in a lot of narrative reporting. So I interviewed a lot of people. So I interviewed psychologists, grief counselors, just regular folks who've had profound loss in their life, because I wanted it to be that kind of hybrid. I didn't want it to just be my story. I feel like grief it's universal, and there's so many voices out there that I kind of wanted to make it feel a little bit more universal than just my story, although it's rooted in it. But this one was much more difficult, partly because of the reporting. I was, day in and day or week in and week out, having these very serious conversations. So like I would get to Friday and be like, okay, let's, watch Queer Eye or something, just have fun. And then it was hard, very emotional. So I, a lot of crying, a lot of going on walks with my dog to kind of get through it. So
what in writing this book, between your experiences and writing this book and the research and the interviews that you conducted for the book, what did you learn about what it means to grieve?
I learned a lot. I learned a lot just from talking to experts, but also from talking to other people. So there's a chapter on parents who've lost children, which I was very scared to write about. I was scared to, this, sometimes it's hard to approach those really, really tough topics with people. And I learned so much from them. One important thing that I learned is that your relationship with the person who's died doesn't end, and it can actually evolve, which didn't make sense to me before, but now it makes sense to me that I still, obviously I'd rather have my mom and sister here, but I still have a relationship with them. I talk to them. My sister's pictures on my desk. I feel like she kind of wrote the book with me, as crazy as that sounds. So, and my mom, we have this bond where we watch Hollywood red carpets. And so I do that every year still and think of her. So that was one thing I learned, that the relationship can continue. And then another thing I learned from one of the parents that I interviewed is when my sister died, I have 3 sisters, but I would get really tongue tied when people would say, like, how many siblings do you have? I didn't know what to say. I'd say, do I say 3 and 1 died? Because you don't want to be that person at the party that, says something and then, the record scratches and everybody's depressed. So I really grappled with that. And one of the moms told me that when people say, how many kids do you have? Which is a common question. She says, I have 2, my son who died, and then my daughter. And I just thought that was very courageous, and it really helped me. So I learned a ton, but those are just, kind of 2 of the things that stand out.
I remember meeting somebody once, and that came up, how many children do you have? And she said, 3, 2 here and 1 in heaven.
Yeah.
Or something like that. There's a way to do it without being, like you said, that person at the party. One of the things that I do love, because I certainly have had loss, everyone has had loss, and we forget that's something that does touch all of us and connects all of us, right, worldwide. And that the fact, and you just talked about it, is staying connected to those that we miss. And I think I'm so glad that you have that in your book. Because I think it's not just normal. I think it's healthy. Do you think that, and can you talk about some other things that help with healing after such a loss? You talk about this in your book, but maybe share with those listening and watching some of that.
I think one of the things is, I remember somebody said to me after my mom died, they said, grief doesn't, it's not going to go away. And I was so angry. I was like, why would you say such a horrible thing to me? And then I realized, okay, it doesn't go away. So I think acknowledging that, and in the early days, that's not the easiest thing to acknowledge, but just understanding that it's not going to go away. It's going to become part of your life, and to learn how to maybe incorporate it into your life, whether that's, like for me, watching the red carpet every year still, or talking to my mom and sister. I think that's important. And then another thing that is very helpful to me is just the connection I have found with other people, like hearing other people's stories, meeting somebody randomly, and these things come up, and just those connections can be very healing, not in a cheesy way, but just they really can be. And it's not misery loves company. It's just, I get you, like our experiences may be different, but like it's a really kind of profound connection with people that you can form. And that is very helpful. I would say that if you can, instead of going inward, try and cultivate that, I think it could be helpful.
Yeah, I think it's the reason Facebook groups have become so popular, because you're like, I'm not alone in this.
Yeah.
I love the fact that you touch upon in your book so many areas of loss, and so many things with loss. Parenting after a loss, as a parent, and as a parent who's lost a child, you just want to shut down.
Yeah.
Hospice care, which not everybody thinks of. I mean, that's very difficult, and you're losing this person, and then there's the final loss. Yeah. It's more gradual. And losing loved ones to addiction, like your sister, whether it be alcohol or drugs, especially with the fentanyl crisis that we have, so much more. We're going to continue talking after this quick break with my friend and author, second book, and it's an awesome book. Whether you've lost somebody or not, maybe you're going to get it for somebody else. Pick up a copy. So Sorry for Your Loss, How I Learned to Live with Grief and Other Grave Concerns by Dina Gachman. She is my friend, Pulitzer Center Grantee, and frequent contributor to the New York Times, Vox, Texas Monthly, and more. We'll be back with her and you.
There are a ton of social networking websites, but one stands apart for a very special reason. This one saves lives. It's MatchingDonors.com. MatchingDonors.com links organ donors with people in need of kidney and other transplants. In the U.S., 19 people die each day waiting for an organ transplant, most of them for kidneys. If you've ever considered becoming a living organ donor, or if you have someone in need of an organ transplant, visit MatchingDonors.com. Home of the greatest gift of all, the gift of life. MatchingDonors.com.
Whoa, a new digital music player. Thanks, Mom.
Oh, I'm glad you like it, because I can't wait to toss the big stereo. And now that we got your dad that big HD TV he wanted, we can throw out our old TV too.
Hold up. You can't just throw out electronics.
Really?
They need to be recycled or donated.
And how would we do that?
It's so easy, Mom. Today, recycling electronics is just as easy as buying them. GreenerGadgets.org has all the info. We just enter our zip code to find a certified recycling center nearby. There are thousands of them, and new ones are being added all the time. Some of our local stores are even certified recycling locations.
I like that.
Did you know that some of the stuff in our old electronics could be used to make new products and conserve natural resources?
Well, okay then. Let's gather them up. What was that website again?
greenergadgets.org. We just enter our zip code and go.
Most gasoline now contains 10% ethanol, and that's okay. Gas with higher than 10% ethanol is not okay. For your mower, chainsaw, or generator, I'm Chris Kaiser, president of the Outdoor Power Equipment Institute. What you put in your car may no longer be safe for other engines. Look before you pump. 15, 30, or 85% ethanol is harmful and illegal to use in outdoor power equipment. A consumer can find out about which fuels are appropriate at lookbeforeyoupump.com. Look before you pump. Protect your equipment, stick with E10 or less.
911, what's your emergency?
America's healthcare system is broken and people are dying.
Welcome to Code WACK, where we shine a light on America's callous healthcare system, how it hurts us, and what we can do about it. I'm your host, Brenda Gazar. This time on Code WACK. How is it that treating COPD, a respiratory disease, can cost someone $7,000 in the Bronx, New York, but nearly $100,000 just 30 miles away in New Jersey? How has the state of Maryland kept its hospital costs in check? And how might other states do the same? To find out, we spoke with Richard Master, CEO of MCS Industries, Inc., founder of Business Leaders for Healthcare Transformation, and executive director of his latest documentary, American Hospitals.
This is a perverse incentive because, insurance companies are supposed to be negotiating on our behalf for better pricing, but they make a percentage of the overall premium. So they're incentivized to raise prices. They want premiums to go up. It's a built-in revenue enhancer. So this is why hospitals and insurance companies sometimes are on both sides of the bargaining table, but really when it comes to challenges like the challenges that we're making or the public is making or the government is making, they're really in the same camp.
Thank you, Richard Master and Wendell Potter. To find out where you can watch the new film, American Hospitals, go to fixithealthcare.com/events. Get the full Code WACK story on progressivevoices.com and on the PV app. Catch all our episodes by subscribing to Code WACK wherever you find your podcasts. This podcast is powered by Heal California, a nonprofit that uplifts the voices of those fighting for healthcare reform around the country. Until next time, stay healthy.
We are back. Welcome back. Second half of the second hour of the program with our second guest in the program today, Dina Gachman, a Pulitzer Center Grantee, frequent contributor to the New York Times, Vox, Texas Monthly, and more. New York Times bestselling ghostwriter, author of Brokenomics, 50 Ways to Live the Dream on a Dime. But it's her latest book we're talking about today, something I think everybody should get a copy of, whether for themselves or someone in their circle of friends or family. It's called So Sorry for Your Loss, How I Learned to Live with Grief and Other Grave Concerns. Dina's joining me today from Texas. She lives there outside of Austin with her hubby and son. Her website is DinaGachmanWrites.com. That's DINAGACHMAN Writes.com, and on Twitter at Dina Gachman. Dina, thanks for holding and welcome back. When my father died young, somebody said to me, "Welcome to the club you didn't want membership in." Mm-hmm. And you mentioned like the grief club, right? Mm-hmm. And certainly membership to this has zero perks. But I do think reading a book like this, So Sorry for Your Loss, can make it less painful because you're not alone. Mm-hmm. And even though And it was right what was taught to you. Somebody told me once, like my son died, they said the hole in your heart will never go away, but it will get smaller. Mm-hmm. And the farther away you get from that event, like you will smile again, you will laugh again. And when you're in it, you just don't believe that. Yeah. In interviewing people, regardless of how they lost a loved one, what would you find to be the common denominator? I mean, obviously, other than grief, depression, sadness, but, what would you find to be, one or more common denominators among people?
Well, I think one thing I've learned is that everyone does it differently. So there is definitely not one way to do it. There's no 5 stages. You're not going to go through a neat and tidy order of things. So I think the commonality is that we all do it very differently and it hits us at different times. But I do think that for people, like I was saying before, I think that finding that connection seems to be very helpful for people. So whether it's a parent who started a soccer fund, that's something that they can do to connect with other people, in their child's name, or, just a little, create a plot in a garden, or, things like that, I think seem to be common among people who are sort of, professionals call it integrating grief into your life. So rather than pushing it away, trying to find ways to integrate it into your life, so that it's, not consuming you, but that you can sort of still acknowledge it, I think is important.
Yeah, to keep their memory alive, right? My aunt, when she lost her husband, cancer and fast, the family, we all pitched in, and they used to sit near this place on the river and feed the ducks together. They go for a walk and go there. So they have a bench and it has his name on it, or a plaque. When I've had loss in my life, there's individual therapy, right? There's bereavement therapy individually, there's groups. I didn't like that because it almost was like, oh, well, you lost your father, I lost my son. You know what I mean? People can one up each other. I mean, people get angry. Obviously, it is one of the 5 stages. But, I didn't see a lot of books out there that helped to address various stages of grief, other than, of course, you have Elizabeth Kubler-Ross on grief and grieving. And I do feel we experience those stages, but there's different times. There can be months of a break in between in different order. C.S. Lewis wrote A Grief Observed, but your book is different. And I think it's the perfect gift for somebody who's grieving. I think I just think it's very, very helpful. I mean, you have your personal experiences in the book. You have experts who give advice. You also have the humor. It's very different than Kubler-Ross and C.S. Lewis's books. And if somebody's looking for a grief book, I wish that you had written this before I had my grief. It would have been helpful. But I'm not alone in this. Lauren Hoff, who was a New York Times bestselling author of Leaving Isn't the Hardest Thing, said it's a monument to the work of remembering and a testament to the immutable love of family and the grief that forever changes us. She talks on and on about you, Publishers Weekly, talks about it being a poignant personal exploration of grief. And I think that encapsulates it truly. And how you put words to the uncomfortable realities of loss and deconstruct its social myths. And that I want to touch upon, because why, when we all go through this, are we so afraid to talk about it? Do you think it's because we're all, even though we all know we're going to die, we're afraid to talk about death because that's the inevitable end for all of us?
I think it's that. I think it's, different cultures, I think, express and experience grief differently. But I think in the West, at least US, UK, we're very scared of those big emotions, I think, sometimes. And so it's the big emotions that come with grief that I think causes either the grieving person to kind of keep it quiet. You don't want to cry at work. You don't want to cry on the street. It's just not acceptable here. And for the person who is not grieving, but who maybe is scared to trigger the person who's grieving, or, uncomfortable with those big emotions because you don't know what to do. And I think, one of the reasons I wanted to write the book too, is I wanted it to be for people who have loss in their life, but also for people who maybe don't know what to say or feel very intimidated by grief. Because I was one of those people before, if such profound loss came into my life, like I didn't know what to say. I was afraid to trigger. And I think it's important for people to understand that, you're probably not going to trigger somebody unless you say something horrible or you say nothing at all. So I just, I also hope that people maybe who are just curious about grief will read the book as well, because I think some of that is in there too. But I think
it's so interesting you say that, because my father died in 1992 and he was 57, and my husband, who you know very well, and he was my boyfriend at the time, and he didn't know what to do.
Yeah,
he didn't understand, like, don't touch me, my father may be watching. I mean, he didn't understand some of the craziest things, that come out And it's definitely a process, and like you said, it's a different process for everybody. So I think it's interesting that it can be a very helpful resource, like you said, for people who maybe you're married to somebody or living with somebody or have a friend that's had loss, and you just don't know how to deal with them. It gives them a window into what that person is going through, because when somebody dies, and this, it's like the world stops, but it's going on around you, but you can't relate to it going on around you. I remember my son died and I was in therapy one-on-one, and I said to the woman, I'm so angry when I'm walking down the street, I'm suffering and I'm so angry. And she said, everybody has suffering of some level. They're just not wearing it on their sleeves. She goes, but if you were to stop, she goes, it's all different. Like somebody may have lost a job. Somebody, may have financial trouble. Maybe somebody just found out they have cancer. Maybe somebody's, long-term relationship broke up, and of course, there's people, that, they've lost. Will Schwalbe says, New York Times bestselling author of the End of Your Life book club. It's powerful. It's an indispensable book. And he said, unlike any book on grief that I've previously found, and this because you're an author second time around. I know this because I've dabbled in the idea of becoming an author. That's one of the things. I mean, you really, you can't write a book or get a deal to write a book unless it's something different than what is out there. Have you had any stories, whether in the book or people maybe who didn't make the cut that you interviewed, or people that have read the book and spoken to you that maybe stayed with you or touched that you want to share upon?
I interviewed a lot of people because I wrote a proposal first, because for nonfiction, unless you're like Prince Harry, you have to write a proposal. I doubt he did. But so I interviewed many more people for the proposal that I just couldn't fit all those voices in. So there's so many stories that will stay with me, and people still, I'm still having book events, and people will share, really tough things. And so, I'm hearing a lot of that. There is one woman that stuck with me that I flew to New York a couple of weeks ago for a book event. And the woman next to me, we were saying like, why are you going to New York? Told her about the book event and the book, and it's about grief. And she goes, I will not be reading that. And I knew where she was going. I was not insulted because I was like, okay, I think I know where this is going. And she said, I have a lot of grief in my life and I tuck it down and I bottle it up and I don't want to look at it. And I was like, okay, that's like, I'm not insulted. Like my book's not, I'm not an expert. I'm not here to be like, this will save you. But I felt like that will stay with me because I'm going to think about that woman for a long time and wonder if she's ever going to let that, her grief come out or look at her grief. Cause I just felt bad for her. It must've been pretty traumatic.
We have less than a minute left. What do you want to leave our listeners and viewers with, and where can they get this wonderful book?
You can get it anywhere. Anywhere books are sold. Tomorrow's Indie Bookstore Day, so it'd be awesome if you could get it from your favorite local indie bookstore. But yeah, you can get it, online or at bookstores, but Indie Bookstore Day. And, I guess I hope that this comforts people who are either newly grieving or it's been several years. I did add a lot of levity because I feel like that helps. And, I hope anybody that's just curious about grief or wants to understand it maybe a little bit more.
Thank you, Dina. I love you. Mwah.
Thank you very much.
Dina Gachman, Pulitzer Center Grantee, frequent contributor to the New York Times, Vox, Texas Monthly, and more. New York Times bestselling ghostwriter. Her first book, Brokenomics, is awesome. Get it, 50 Ways to Live the Dream on a Dime. But this book is something, the second one, so relatable. So sorry for your loss, so I learned to live with grief and other grave concerns. Check out her website, DinaGachmanWrite.com. On Twitter, follow her there at Dina Gachman. And Dina, for that Any Bookstore Day tomorrow, we will put your book featured on all of our social media and a link for them to be able to get that.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right. Proud of you, girl. Love you.
Thank you. Bye.